What did Kevin do in your school? In 4th grade, Kevin threw a nasty spitball and hit a girl. The principal decided that Kevin should make 1,000 spitballs as punishment. This was a Catholic school 35 years ago. At first, it was funny, but as Kevin slowly ran out of saliva, it became sad. He would ask to get water. Then he would beg. Then he would sob, all while balling up little bits of loose leaf paper and rubbing them on his raspy tongue. I haven't seen that much psychological torture since the Deer Hunter Russian roulette scene. Kevin wore a full spandex Spiderman suit to a Halloween party. Now he's well known for being the drunkest person in the room, and this night was no exception. After a few beers and a ton of shots, Spid-A was unleashed. Mask up. The extra movements were not kind to Kev, as most of us realized when he raced to the door. Attempting to turn the door knob was futile as his spitter hands failed him, spraying a nice mist of vomit through his mask all over the wall. My buddies decided that Kevin should probably sleep this one off around 1 AM and took him home. Kevin forgot that his costume lacked pockets and didn't have his keys. Determined to get into the house without waking his parents up, he climbed onto the roof. His plan: drop into the open bathroom window. Kevin still had not learned from his earlier failure and his grip slipped. He fell onto the balcony, pissing himself and waking up his parents. So my friends and I were coming back from Mexico and were in waiting line at the border when someone in the car noticed it was taking so long because they were having a drug sniffing dog sniff each car. Kevin, realizing he had 2 poppy seed bagels, scarfed both of them down so fast he nearly choked. When we asked him why he did it, he said because he heard poppy seeds make you fail drug tests. Though the drug sniffing dogs would think it was weed. We still make fun of Kevin to this day. Have you ever had a classmate that seemed like they were always doodling? Well, suffice to say, I've had some rather interesting encounters with the artistic endeavors of fellow students. One piece in particular sticks out in my mind, though it wasn't so much the subject of the drawing as what it implied about the antics of person who drew it. The young man in question had transferred to the school midway through 7th grade, and although we didn't have any classes together, he seemed to be amiable enough when passing me in the hall. After a brief conversation about something not particularly memorable, I invited him to eat lunch with my friends and me. He accepted, and after arriving at the disused parking lot where my group usually congregated, we all went through the standard inquiries and introductions. As is typical of such conversations, the subject of personal interests eventually came up, and the young man mentioned that he was an aspiring artist. I can't recall if it was out of politeness or genuine interest, but my friends and I encouraged our new acquaintance to showcase some of his work for us. After some slight hesitation, he agreed. From out of the young man's backpack came an assortment of loose paper and dog-eared notebooks, all of which were covered in sketches depicting a fairly standard theme. Each drawing featured a masculine figure brandishing a medieval armament of some sort, a sword, a spear, a staff, while frozen in a dashing pose that seemingly implied a courageous rush into battle. There were no adversaries to be seen nor damsels awaiting rescue, just a valiant hero caught in mid-stride with his formidable weapon held aloft. A friendly round of compliments and light-hearted teasing followed the exhibition, after which we all forgot about the sketches. At least, until the incident that made their invisible prophecy come true. It was a day like any other, as wholly forgettable as the day before, until I arrived at the parking lot, where my friends were waiting. Right away, it was clear that there was some piece of intriguing gossip being discussed, and I quickly asked to be filled in on it. "Remember that guy from before?" a friend of mine asked. "The guy with all of those drawings?" I nodded my affirmation, and my friend continued. "He got caught jacking it in English class." Now, everyone had heard stories of such things before, whether they were entirely true or not, but it was the young artist's reaction to being caught that made this tale particularly unique. According to the legend, his extracurricular activity had first been discovered by a girl sitting directly next to him. She had released an ear-splitting shriek of "ew" and jumped up from her seat, all the while pointing an accusing finger at the young man's nether regions. Rather than reacting as any sane person would have, he opted to imitate the figures in his artwork. The young man leapt to his feet, took hold of his weapon, and with a triumphant guffaw of Taliho, onward, he chased the terrified girl from the classroom and down the hall. The young man's suspension lasted for 2 weeks, during which time he allegedly received a psychiatric evaluation of some kind. When he finally returned, he was all but entirely ostracized from every social clique in the school, as everyone was rather uncomfortable around him. His reputation was eventually forgotten when another student brought a playboy to school, but I personally doubt if I'll ever look at jousting the same way again. Had a redneck kid hit his foot with a chainsaw. The next week he stole Kevin's pencil and Kevin said, "Give it back, or I'll stomp on your foot." Redneck broke the pencil. Kevin stomped on his foot that had barely scabbed over. They started rolling around in the classroom and Kevin gets stabbed by the pencil in the arm. Redneck kid breaks a bone in his hand from missing a punch and hitting the floor of our classroom. The Kevin I knew was viewed as a nerd for most of his adolescent to teenage years. I always stuck up for him and hung out with him since we lived next to each other. He would always ask me why no one likes him, which I would assure him people were just assholes. I would continually invite him to other cool friends' houses, even though my friends would look at me in disgust. Around 8th grade Kevin met this bully Alex. He was known as the scumbag of the school and would make fun of everyone just to be an asshole. People were like scared of this kid, even though people were twice his size. Anyway, Kevin started to try and impress Al just to make him laugh, and so that Kevin could fit in and be cool. He did a bunch of stupid things, start food fights, stole food from the cafe, called teachers bitches, and acted stupid in class just to get a laugh. This continued through high school and I didn't really talk to him as much. Senior year we had the annual Jersey Shore trip for the seniors. Last major memory I have of Kevin. Just trying to fit in. He overdosed on God knows what. All I remember is the faint memory of him trying to walk down the stairs of the hotel almost convulsing, and the black stare in his eyes. I attempted to help him, but I don't even think he remembered everything we have been through or really who I was at the moment. I guess the next morning he was conscious, but stayed in the bed the next 3 days staring at the wall. Everyone in his room was freaked out. That was the moment he was just known as the complete weirdo and I really did feel bad for him. I hung out with him a few times after that, but he would always ask me, do I seem weird? As much as I tried to keep talking to him I couldn't. I guess since then he has had a couple of mental breakdowns, I think mostly because of his strict parents. He eventually went to a mental institution and stayed for a little while. I still see him occasionally and get do you know who has weeb texts. The few times I have talked to him, it has just been utterly creepy and mysterious. He was my best friend growing up and just turned into a complete world good. I had 4 Kevins in my class and they were all in the honor roll. Paulo, on the other hand, would shit himself in his pants while class was ongoing. By the time the smell has wafted through our kindergarten noses, he'd let out a maniacal laugh. He would refuse to get up from his seat and clean himself off at the bathroom. The teacher, who all the girls loved because of her daintily manicured nails and posh jewelry, gave up on her dignity and picked up Paulo from his seat, pulled his pants down, and sat him on the classroom sink and washed his butt. Shit went down the drain, but that demonic laugh was still heard decades later. Posted this last night but still funny. I sent my aunt, a lifelong elementary school teacher, the Kevin story. She sent me this. I've taught a few students like Kevin, both male and female, with situations like his. The family whose eldest child was mulatto. Both parents were white, and they insisted that he was not adopted, and both of this, even though the younger 3 were blonde and blue-eyed. The woman who came in for a conference with a 3-year-old younger sister who cried and ran around the room disturbing our talk. The mother pulled up her blouse and said to the kid, "Come and get titty." She ran to her mother, clasped her lips around a rather grotesque breast, and proceeded to suckle for the rest of the interview. The child, who slept in her parents' bedroom and could do a good impression of what her parents did in bed every night. Child welfare was called immediately. The father, who was a prison guard, and proceeded to put his unholstered gun on the desk when we had a talk about his son's behavior. The prison was called immediately. The mother, who wrote me notes saying that she could come in and teach the children about Jesus anytime I wanted. She always started them with "Dear Janet" and ended them, "Love, Louise." The Puerto Rican child, who always called me Senora Bruja until I found out it meant Mrs. Witch. The 7-year-old kid who brought in a 5-inch hunting knife and threatened to kill a kid at recess. The police were called immediately, and that one made the local paper. He was immediately transferred to special edition. Only 5 months after I asked that he be sent there, the ice grader who asked the new superintendent who unexpectedly came to see my class, "Who the fuck are you?" My new boss turned around and walked out with an expression that said, "What have I gotten myself into?" I often wondered that about myself. The kid who brought in a half-used prescription of birth control pills for show and tell because she liked the pretty round silver and pink box. Holy shit. We had this kid named Kevin in our high school. He wore a trench coat every day. Once he wore a gas mask to school and got suspended, and his mom got mad at the school because he was just expressing himself. He was actually pretty harmless and was a nice kid, just odd. One day I was walking up the stairs while staring at my feet. I look up and there is a guy in a trench coat with a Guy Fawkes mask. I was pretty damn startled, but then I was like, oh hey Kevin. Kevin and I attended preschool together at the local IMCA. He was a resident bully, and every recess, he would take the opportunity to terrorize a fellow classmate. On cold winter days, recess was spent in the giant gymnasium. Because the Y was still open to the public, the gym was separated into thirds by huge, heavy-duty nylon curtains, leaving a tiny gap between the bottom of the curtain and the gym floor. As we played on one side, there might be a basketball game next door, an aerobics class, or an indoor soccer match. On this particular day, we preschoolers had been given these little gym scooters, basically little plastic squares with wheels attached to them, so that we could scoot around on our butts and bust our knuckles on the gym floor to play with. Kevin promptly stole one from a classmate and kicked it across the gym. It ended up scooting underneath the curtain partition into what I think was a college basketball game. With surgical accuracy, the fates aligned the exact time it would take Kevin to get on his hands and knees to look under the curtain for it, and the time it would take a basketball player to kick it back where it came from. To our horror/enjoyment, the little scooter returned from the other side at top speed, connecting with Kevin's face with incredible force. In short, we got to see our class bully get his face shattered with a dose of instant karmic justice. I think he was pretty tame when he was in middle and high school. I made friends with him online when he was 13, but I went to college with him, and he went to the emergency room with accidental self-inflicted knife wounds. Looked down the barrel of a homemade coat to cannon he made for a Rube Goldberg competition. Asked me to help move him out of his apartment when he hadn't packed a single thing, and did an epic amount of every drug he could find. He managed to get unjustly accused of sexual harassment by being a socially awkward little bastard. He got detained by police because all of the guns and ammo and electronics in his apartment made the maintenance guy think he was building a bomb and running some sort of terrorist cell. In his senior year he had a psychotic break due to Paxil and amphetamine withdrawal, and started talking about how all the professors in the police department were bugging him and his computer in order to steal the telecom coding scheme he was working on that violated Shannon-Hartley theorem. In graduate school at Cornell he got placed on a psych hold because he was taking photos of the gorgeous in Ithaca and fell, and they assumed he was trying to kill himself. I believe he wasn't. Not flashy or effective enough for him, and then afterward he ranted about how the nurses stole his blood and he bonded with an old man from Belgrade. Despite all that, the harm he did was largely limited to himself, and he was a nice guy, even when he was nuts. He came to my extremely hot outdoor wedding and thought to buy a case of bottled water for everyone. He ended up going to Libya to fight. Then later he went to Syria and is, I guess, presumed beheaded. He was definitely a source of stress in my life, but I'm sad he's gone. We will call her Kevin for this story. Kevin was one of those kids that would do anything for attention, and I mean anything. Besides purposely pissing herself in the middle of class because she dared someone else to dare her to do it. The worst was when we went to see an orchestra play our junior year. The student section was divided half on the upper section and half on the lower section of the theater. I was sitting about 2 spots next to her on the first row overlooking the lower section. Kevin at this point was 7 months pregnant and constantly telling people she could milk herself. She brought it up again during the performance, and one of the kids told her she couldn't milk herself. So, instead of being a normal person, She pulls her shirt up, leans over the rail, and starts to squeeze, and she starts to drip her breast milk onto the students below us. The entire place went berserk. The girl who got milk over her head was made fun of the rest of her high school career, and Kevin was suspended and became a legend. Let's call him Kevin. Kevin was a pretty strange kid. He did weird stuff every day, e.g. he dropped a plastic bag filled with water out of the window right on the head of a poor old woman. One day he thought he could make some friends by stealing money from his parents, buying 50 pizzas, and sharing them with his classmates. He was pretty dumb and weird. One time he asked out a girl who declined him. He got really mad, punched and kicked a wall furiously, crying and sobbing. Suddenly he became very calm, sat down in the middle of the hallway, and didn't talk with us anymore. Sometimes he talked in a really high and annoying Jerry-like voice for no reason. There was an incident later at his boarding school. He got dropped out because he lit a curtain on fire, put the handle of a razor in his anus and bent over waddled into a rally interrupting the speaker and trying to dodge teachers. Another Kevin sprayed a bunch of Axe body spray in his backpack, lit it on fire, zipped it closed, and threw it on the teacher's desk. Not sure if Kevin-ish enough, but another kid spent the entire school day on the rooftop of the school throwing random shit at students. I think he would come down and grab a bag of trash to throw. He would throw partially eaten apples and stuff. Kevin and his friend used to reenact RuneScape battles outside the Food Technology Center. Seriously, they would bat sticks around and pretend they were swords or staffs and use their different colored jackets to resemble the different armor. We all played it during school, just never admitted it. Never mind about pretending we was in the game at 16 years old.